So this is why what we see here, this idea of translation, is going to mean something more. Now, most people kind of believe, and many of the scholars believe, when we talk about translating, as the dust was translated from dust to a human being, and we can see this articulation in our own lives. We see human beings. They're not just a pile of dirt. It's a human being. But you see this dirt moved into a human being, and from this, Enoc is translated because Yah took him. Lakach, Yah took him, and he took him, and what does that mean? He translated him by taking him away. And so you have this translation of this human being into a spirit being, if you will, into a transformed or translated body, this Enoc. And we see now, there are many discussions of this in Scripture. There is this discussion of Isaiah, who says, I saw the throne, which means he was translated. You have the idea of Eliyahu or Elijah, Eliyahu, being translated. You have the idea, Paul says, I knew a guy who saw the third heaven, speaking about himself 14 years before, claiming he was translated. You have Yochanan, or the author of Kizayon, Revelation, saying he was translated. He was there at the throne room seeing the saints under the throne and the 144,000 and the seraphim worshiping around the throne and the elders and so on and so forth. This depicts this idea of being translated from here, from humanity, being translated into the seventh heaven or the third heaven, or depending on how you want to number them or how they're numbered or whatever. I don't know. I can't tell you how they're numbered. But we do know that we have this idea that there were personas in Scripture that were translated. They were taken away. They did not see death. And this is what the author in Hebrew is telling us. He did not see death because Yah took him. Yah took him. Okay? So this is kind of an important part about Enoc. I also find it interesting that he was 364 years or 365 years old, because we have this discussion about the 364-day calendar, and yet Enoc saw 365 years. That's very interesting. All right, so let's get into some more of the credibility on this thing. And slide 9 is a very important slide because it's going to show us a fragment of the 10 Enoc manuscripts that were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, okay? Now here's this fragment, and here is the translation. Now this is where this gets very important, because people who are so offended by Enoc, they're offended by the idea that Genesis 6 would relate that these people, these watchers, came to earth, and it wasn't the children of Seth or the children of Cain, but rather it was fallen angels. And so here's what the fragment says. Here's what the fragment reads that's in this particular Dead Sea Scroll fragment, which is fragment B from a cave 4 at Qumran. They, the leaders, and all of them took for themselves wives from all that they chose, and they began to cohabit with them and to defile themselves with them and to teach them sorcery and spells and the cutting of roots and to acquaint these with herbs. And they became pregnant by them and bore great giants 3,000 cubits high. Now people say, oh, 3,000 cubits, that's going too big. Well, it depends on the cubit, right? It depends on what cubit you're discussing. Now, if you're discussing the cubit that we all believe is the cubit, which of course is, from the forearm to the tip of the finger, right? That cubit. That's one cubit. But what if the cubit they're discussing here was, from this knuckle to the end of the thumb? What if that's the cubit? We don't know what the cubit was. It's an ancient writing. It was a writing that appeared before the flood. Now, I want to read a passage here from Bereshith, Genesis chapter 6. This is the controversial passage about which, I get kicked out of Pentecostal churches all the time for just raising this issue. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of Elohim, and that's the big question, right? The Ben Elohim, saw at the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them women of all which they chose. And Yahweh said, my Ruach shall not always strive with men, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. His days shall be 120 years. Yet there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of Elohim came into and unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. And the same became warriors and tyrants, which were of ancient times, men of infamy. I have to share something with you, which is a recent discovery that we came upon. I was looking at this word Nephilim, and I wanted to see, okay, what is this word Nephilim? What does it mean? And so on and so forth. The strong, mighty men, tyrants, etc. They define Nephilim as this really what you find here at the end of verse 4. But I began to look closely at the word Nephilim, and I discovered some things. That when you talk about Nephilim, this is going to be spelled in the Hebrew, this idea of Nephil, or Nun, Pei, Yod, Lamed. That would be kind of like an N, a PH, a Y, and an L. Nun, Pei, Yod, Lamed. But the word that appears in the Masoretic text is not Nun, Pei, Yod, Lamed, but Nun, Pei, Lamed, Yod, Mem, Sapi, which means that it's not Nephilim that is there, but actually comes from the root Nafal. Nafalim, not Nephilim. Well, does that mean anything? Yes, it does. Because when you look at Nafalim, you're going to see that it says the fallen ones, those cast out or cast down, fallen, Nafal. Different from Nephil, Nafal, the root, those that are cast down. So you might still be able to say, well, look, the sons of Cain were cast down. They weren't. The curse was put on Cain, not necessarily his sons. But you do see here that what was cast down is these watchers. The watchers were cast down. And so when we see this story here, and you say to yourself, well, look, I'm not sure that that's angels, because I still believe that that's probably, the sons of Cain or the sons of Seth or whatever it may be. All right, but you run into a problem when you get to that everybody's favorite passage, which is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. 1 Corinthians 11. And of course, a lot of women say, don't even read to me 1 Corinthians 11. I don't want to hear it, Steve. Be quiet. Hush up. But 1 Corinthians 11 does have something to say here, and this is a difficult passage, right? Because we're talking about women and their hair and whether or not they have a hair covering. Now, I'm going to read a passage to you from the Et Sefer, from this 1 Corinthians 11, beginning in verse 11. Nevertheless, neither is the man without the woman, neither the woman without the man in Yahweh. For as the woman is of the man, even so is the man also by the woman. But all things are of Yahweh. Judge in yourselves, is it comely that a woman should pray unto Yahweh uncovered? Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a shame unto him? But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. You hear this? Her hair is given to her for a covering. But if any man seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither the called out assemblies of Yahweh. Now, in this that I declare to you, I praise you, not that you come together not for the better, but for the worst. Now, it goes on to say that a woman should cover her head. Why? In verse 10, it says, I'm going to go back a little bit here, just a little bit, back to verse 5. It reads here in the Et Sefer, not every woman who prays or prophesies with an uncovered head disgraces the head itself, but it is a disgrace for those who are shaven. In other words, if you have a shaved head, like a lot of women did, like a lot of women do, then you are to cover your head before you pray or prophesy in the church. For if the woman is sheared yet wholly covered, such women are not obscene when wholly covered. That's different than what you're going to read in your version of 1 Corinthians 11 verse 6. Okay? But now look, verse 9. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. All right? Verse 10, the most important passage here. For this cause ought the woman to have power on her head because of the angels. Now, what is he trying to say here? A woman should have power over her head because of the angels? I think it does refer back to Enoch and the watchers, because what he's saying here is cover your head because a woman's hair is her glory. Cover your head so that you don't tempt the angels, right? What did it say in Bereshit 6? The sons of Elohim looked upon women and that they were fair, right? That they were fair. And of course, the scripture teaches that the glory of a woman is her hair. Therefore, what Paul is saying to you here is you need to cover your head, word for word, because of the angels. Cover your head because of the angels. I think that's a very clear indication that Paul recognized that a woman's uncovered head is a temptation to the angels. And remember, the term watchers wasn't just used in the book of Enoc, but was also used in the book of Daniel, right? Talking about the watchers. Okay. So when we look at this slide here in slide 9, you see that what's going on here in slide 9 is it's telling you the passage that was found in that fragment isn't some obscure passage in Enoch talking about the sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation, but is an express fragment telling you that these watchers came down, had relations with human women, the women got pregnant and gave birth to giants. Very clear, very obvious. Okay, so and what is written here from the ancient library of Qumran and modern scholarship is that the original language of most of this work was in all likelihood Aramaic, they try to claim. Everything's Aramaic. If you don't know what it is, it must be Aramaic. An early Semitic language, although the original version was lost in antiquity, thank you for saying that. Portions of a Greek translation were discovered in Egypt and quotations were known from the church fathers. Yeah, and the whole book was found in Ethiopia and the Assyriac text. The discovery of the text from the Qumran K4 has finally provided parts of the Aramaic original. In the fragment exhibit here, humankind is called on to observe how the unchanging nature follows Yah's will. Yes. However, bear in mind that a lot of these scholars will not recognize Paleo-Hebrew as the predecessor to Babylonian Hebrew, which is what we see the Masoretic text in, although the Masoretic Hebrew is the Babylonian Hebrew marked with nikudim, the crumbs, the vowel signs. All right? Okay, let's take a look at slide 11. The book of Enoc or Enoch is regarded as canonical by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and the Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo Church. And in 1773, Scottish explorer James Bruce went to Ethiopia and secured 3 copies, which were taken back to Britain. In 1829, Oxford Hebrew professor, that's D.H. Lawrence, translated the text into English. So people say, well, it's not a canonical work. Well, it is to the Ethiopians. It's not a canonical work. Well, it is to the Eritreans. It's not a canonical work. Well, it was to the Assyriac church. It's not a canonical work. Well, it was to the Essenes. And bear in mind that the Assyriac church and the Ethiopian church were formed by Kepha, Simon Peter. Okay? Let's take a look at 13. The Enochian story of the Watchers is also referred to and also referenced in the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, which is a book. By the way, the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, it's a long read, right? Because each one of the patriarchs has something to say. It is most assuredly pseudepigraphal because, you don't have anybody gathering up 12 separate letters and saying, here you go. We've got the 12 letters right here, and we put them all together. It was gathered together and became a writing, the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, contained in the book of Bereshit, which includes the first and second book of Adam and Eve and the Apocalypse of Abraham and the Apocalypse of Moshe and so on. Good book. But the Enochian story of the Watchers is contained in that, the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, and in the Sefer Yobelim, in Jubilees. So whereas Genesis gives us Genesis 6, 1 through 4, Jubilees is going to take that passage and expand onto it much more and talk about, make direct reference to what was written in the book of Enoc and how Enoc described what the watchers did.